Hey, I guess you can call this a postscript to episode 14. Heard from an old friend, Jim Young, who's a Vincent guru over in Vermont. And he said, Bumpy passed along that last episode of yours, and, your continuity on the bulb discussion doesn't make any sense. The positive and the negative on a bulb have to have continuity or the bulb won't light up. Duh. I guess you could call it a senior moment or a brain fart. But what happened is I was doing a continuity test. And what got me going on that is when I'd put power battery on the Velocette and I'd turn on the headlight or I would activate the brake light, I'd get a short in the system. So when I pulled the stop light bulb out and the tail light bulb out, the short would go away. So that got me thinking, well, there's got to be something wrong with the bulb. So I did a continuity test across a bulb from my spare bulb inventory here, and I happened to grab one that was a bad bulb. So I did the continuity test, and there was no continuity across the positive and the negative, and I wasn't really thinking about that and what it all meant. And when I tested the bulbs I took out, and there was continuity, I mistakenly thought that was the problem. And of course, uh, the bulbs have to have continuity or they won't light up. In fact, you test them with a continuity meter, and that's how you know you got a bad filament if you don't have continuity. So anyway, what was the issue if it wasn't that? Again, I would put the bulbs in and I'd have a short, and I'd take the bulbs out and everything would be fine. Well, let me show you. Interestingly enough, the reproduction tail light on there, when the bulbs would go into the socket, the blade connectors would get pushed, and the way they were aligned inside the housing, they would get pushed up against the side of the tail light housing, and they would short out. And both terminals were doing that. When you took the bulbs out, the terminals came back and the short was interrupted. But when you put the bulbs in, they were pushed up against the side of the housing. So that's what was the short. It wasn't, the bulbs weren't bad, it was the tail light fixture that the terminals are not aligned properly. So I've got to put some insulation around them and try to realign them a little bit so that when they're pushed in a little bit by the bulb, they don't hit the side of the tail light housing.
We have the tail light on the top, we have the stop light. And I take the bulb out, and you can see in here that I put a piece of shrink tube, a piece of white shrink tube on this terminal, because what was happening is when you would screw the bulb in, the terminal would twist. It would go down. It's just connected by a rivet that's not as tight as maybe it should be. So when you turn the bulb in, that terminal would turn and it would short out onto the housing of the tail light. So what I did is I put a piece of shrink tube back in here so that should it ever happen again, the shrink tube will insulate it and it won't short out. And in the meantime, I will have to remember that when I install the bulbs is to install them counterclockwise rather than clockwise, and that way I won't be turning that terminal base as I'm installing the bulb. Kind of silly nonsense, isn't it? Something like that. It just, there you can see better the white shrink tube I've put in there to keep it from touching the base here and shorting out should it move as the bulb is installed. And we can confirm that there's no short. When we're on the housing, there is. So that would be your positive. So we have provided enough insulation there to solve that problem.
Okay, so we've got the shorting of the tail light situation solved, and thank you to Jim Young for reminding me how stupid I am, that you have to have continuity in a bulb or it won't light. Anyway, we did find the solution to that particular problem. What else could possibly go wrong? Well, I picked up the tires yesterday and installed the front. This morning I went to install the back, and the tire didn't have any air in it. Apparently they pinched a tube when they were installing the tire onto the tube, and so now I got to bring it back down there. I also noticed that they didn't change the tubes. They used the old original tubes, and I had asked them to put new tire bands on and new tubes, and apparently they looked at the tubes and thought they were serviceable and they wouldn't bother change them. Either that or they didn't have any tubes in stock. I don't know. I'll get to the bottom of that story. But anyway, I wanted new ones, whether they were holding air or not, because they're like 40-year-old tubes. So we have, what else could go possibly wrong? But the good news was I couldn't go for a ride today anyway if everything had been working properly, because I got a damn backyard full of snow again. Yeah. We'll see you next time.